Hello, everybody, and welcome. Today we're having a panel discussion with respected leaders in the cybersecurity and cyber insurance space to provide perspective on the world of cyber liability insurance and cyber risk management. I am Steven Legg, CEO and co-founder of Antigen Security, and I'd like to kick it over to Ryan Ikeler from Illumio to give a brief introduction.
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. Yeah, Ryan Ikeler. I head up Illumio's incident response and managed services practices. So excited for today's call. Prior to Illumio, I built out one of the largest recovery teams for companies that were experiencing a breach, and we worked very closely with cyber insurance carriers to help those companies in their greatest time of need. So excited for the conversation today, and I think there's obviously a lot of change happening in cyber insurance, a lot of new requirements and regulations and things like that. And I think those are all very good things. So I know a lot of people are scared of them, but excited to maybe ease some of that fear and let people know why it's happening.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Kirsten, do you want to kick us off next?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Kirsten Bay. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cysurance. My background is in finance and cybersecurity, and so I worked in finance for a long time before joining the cyber gang, and always really felt that there is this disparity between risk management and technology implementation. So my mission has always been to try and bring those things together, running threat detection companies, working in threat intelligence, and then decided we really needed an integrated approach. So we founded Cysurance with the idea of integrating cyber insurance programs with service providers and technology providers so that we could really have a much better flow of how that insurance process works, but also gathering the right data to help people get the insurance they need, get the coverage they need when they need it, to Ryan's point. And we are in a hard market. It's a challenging time. But what I'm hoping we can really do is show that the right controls implemented really do reduce severity and impact of these cyber incidents, and that we can make a big difference, that we can make them insurable risks again.
Awesome. Thank you, Kirsten. And finally, Matt.
Yeah, Matt McGonigle, CEO, one of the partners here at RetireCo. Our company really strives to provide access to virtually all lines of insurance, as well as comprehensive risk management solutions outside of the insurance world. So we work with thousands of agents, agencies of all sizes across the country, providing them access to those carriers and those products more or less on an a la carte solution. So they can pick and choose which carriers, which products are most suitable or best interest of their customers, and go to market and deliver those. We also have been behind the development of products in the kind of cyber compliance world, the identity theft space. So again, just kind of continually trying to drive more value, in an industry that's, rapidly evolving and changing. And of course, we deliver a lot of technology as well in kind of the insurance space. So just kind of seeing that whole culmination come together and being able to pull together all these different solutions is something great to see here.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Well, with that, let's go ahead and dive in and start the chat on the first topic. So really what I wanted to kick us off with, and this is kind of a broad strokes question, so I'll let each of you kind of take it where you want to go. Let's talk about the role of cyber liability insurance and risk management. In your opinion, and we'll start maybe with Kirsten for this first question, how can cyber liability insurance be integrated into an organization's risk management strategy, and what should companies be thinking about as they go to do this?
Well, I think this is the burning question everyone is thinking about, or should be thinking about, as we continually go to this digital transformation. And certainly we were accelerated into this, especially with the small and medium-sized business. There were many organizations who were already, larger, who were trying to identify how they have this technology forward approach and how they then have a risk transfer portion of their business to make sense of all of this. For smaller organizations, even into the mid and small enterprise, this idea of really using cyber insurance policy as a means of transferring the last piece we call residual risk has become something that is being worked into the security posture. And so a couple of things. One, I think it enables the security practitioner to have a different conversation in the executive suite, because it enables them to really show how a company could be impacted by a cyber incident, but also how the investment in tools and technology products, in addition to risk management and risk transfer, really complete that whole circle. And so what we've always been trying to figure is how do we make good on you can get a discount, but not like a small discount, but a substantial discount when you make a real significant investment into security posture. And what is that line of demarcation? When you start adding products to the point that it doesn't make a difference anymore, your risk is your risk. And so I think that these are the things where we're becoming mature enough in cyber organizations to make those decisions and have those conversations, but also that the insurance industry is maturing in a way that they can start to discount and understand the impacts against those cyber attacks with the type of security posture that people are implementing. And so I believe we need to have a continually much more collaborative approach between those 2 points to really help organizations, because what we've seen to date and why the market is so challenging is someone bought $1 million policy for $400 and they thought that was fine and didn't invest in anything. And lo and behold, it makes a market full of losses when all of a sudden it's accelerated in frequency and severity of those incidents. So those are the areas where I think we're really starting to see significant shifts and changes in that realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of us in this group talk about the importance of those kind of basic and critical controls, and whether you're talking about it from the perspective of framework or from the perspective of like that cyber seatbelt, I think that's a really critical piece to carry forward, and that organizations should be considering as they decide what the risk management strategy looks like. Ryan, do you want to add anything else there?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I empathize with, anyone in that seat within an organization that has to make these decisions. I think for a long time, you kind of have two sides of the spectrum. You have the side of the spectrum, Kirsten, to your earlier point where, well, I do nothing, but I have insurance. And then you have the other side of the spectrum, which is I'm over inundated with new product. I buy whatever I can. I'm frustrating my C-suite. They think I'm throwing $1 million on the products on the wall, hoping they'll allow some to stick. So I think what's good for the industry as a whole right now is the alignment of cyber insurance with regulators, with the folks who are writing framework. And you can really start to take a more strategy-led approach, meaning my strategy dictates my product versus my product dictating my strategy. And I think that shift, even in the last 6, 9, 12 months, has been really impactful. In Kirsten, to your point, those conversations the security experts internally have with the C-suite is a lot different when you roadmap out a path that's based on something established outside of the organization, that's based on insurance, it's based on requirements. And then to your point, and you can show that ROI of, putting these things into place by getting the discount. So I always try to keep things simple. Like, you can't get life insurance unless you're healthy. That's just how it works. And life insurance is not there so you can get a big old policy and then, go be crazy and kill yourself with cheeseburgers. It's there so you can take care of your family at the end of the day. And I think cyber's the same way. Like, you need to get things in order to get it. It's not meant there to be, your strategy overall for taking care of your company.
You heard it here first. No, don't cram cyber cheeseburgers. Matt, do you want to chime in on this one?
Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more with all of those points. I think the biggest thing is, is just in general, as we look at organizations, I mean, every organization now transacting any type of business more or less is going to have a technology component. So it doesn't matter what your industry is or what you specialize in or what your niche might be. It's influenced, and you now have new risks that are evolving and developing every day, some of which we're not aware of today, but we'll probably be talking about a year from now, right? So I mean, continually trying to address and monitor that situation and understand that regardless of the size of your organization or the business you might be in, these are the same risk you would have if your office were in a floodplain, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, you're dealing with these. And it's just kind of the level of severity or, the number of different, niche type controls you might need in place. But the general risk is there for everybody. So for sure.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think just to kind of close that topic off, I think the real sweet spot for a lot of organizations is going to come probably not this year, maybe next year, but likely in another year or two, when more resources and framework alignment, Ryan, to your point, and Kirsten, really all three of you kind of made this point, as those universes collide and converge, especially where regulations are starting to be rolled out, and we're starting to see like mandatory breach notification across many different industries that never had such requirements before, as well as like state and federal laws worldwide that are requiring mandatory breach notification for all entities. It's really turning this into more of a, these are the table stakes for doing business. This is what every business needs to be concerned about. And every business, Matt, to your point, is a technology business. Regardless of what product or what value you ship, you use technology to do it, and technology is undivorceable from that end result. So I think the more we go down this road, and the more that those things kind of collide and come together in a meaningful way, I think it'll only continue to benefit as frameworks like the CIS framework, NIST, CSF, and others kind of catch up to modern analysis of risks and controls as they actually impact live incidents. Ryan, to your point about not just throwing a million products at the wall. It's really more about identifying the short list of things that make the most difference, the 20% of things that make 80% of the difference, and going whole hog on those, and then doing what you can outside of that. So great question, great responses. I really appreciate the input, guys. So let's go back to you, Matt, and talk a bit about the cost of a data breach. What are the financial and operational costs of a ransomware attack, as an example, and how can cyber liability insurance help mitigate these costs?
Well, I think the first thing you look at is just the, again, the discrepancy between the old policies that were out there and, a traditional cyber rider that might have existed. For a long time, we saw that in the commercial insurance world. It was a $25,000 or $100,000 rider. And of course, the challenge with that was there was little basis for that value. I think the insurance companies didn't take really a deep enough dive in it. I don't think the valuation that was put on the cost to insure that risk, or dollar for dollar, was really appropriately put in place. I would compare it to some of the first long-term care and nursing home policies that came out. It was $1,000 a year, and we're expecting your nursing home costs will be $100 a day. And it's fast forward, and it's drastically different landscape, of course. So when we're looking at kind of those ransomware attacks, tipping somewhere on average of near $500,000, and certainly exceeding millions of dollars in many cases. It doesn't even, I think, go to touch on the, reputational, exposure. What does that mean for, the lost clients in the future? And I mean, we see that in the identity theft space, for example. If you have to notify all of your clients you've suddenly had a breach and their security has been compromised, it's, what's the trust and likelihood of them remaining a customer, continuing to do business with you?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's why the cyber liability insurance itself, being able to, offset that cost and, recoup and provide against that is valuable. But I think at the same time, all of the proactive measures that can be put in place from a cybersecurity standpoint, not only reduce and eliminate that in dollar cost that I think is now starting to be a little bit more in line with what the actual cost might be.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's also helping, proactively avoid all of those other, kind of ancillary effects of that aren't necessarily just financial. It's, the loss of business, the loss of customers, the loss of future trust, the loss of, referrals that you might have garnered. Right. So I think there's just a lot of different elements that go into that. And this is just, kind of one piece of the puzzle as far as, establishing a real comprehensive risk management strategy.
Yeah, no, couldn't agree more. Kirsten, you and I have talked recently about kind of lines of coverage and requirements, and so I'm curious as to your thoughts on this question, especially with what Matt shared there. What are to put a finer point on it, what what are the differences today that we're seeing in like lines of coverage relative to this question, and how do you think that's impacting the cyber insurance market in general?
Well, the big one is that the amount of coverage is being decreased around ransom attacks, because obviously they're significant, and there's again this misalignment between what have you done to protect yourself and the expectation that if you have $1 million policy, we're going to be throwing $1 million worth of recovery towards that remediation effort. The thing that I think is interesting, and because you have it at the top here, data breach, right? And what's happening with ransom attacks is that it's almost becoming de minimis what the ransom is, because everything that comes behind it, to Matt's point, is, the reputational harm, the breach notification. It's like, becoming 10 to 50 times more expensive to remediate and to do investigation and notification than it was actually to deal with paying a ransom if that's what you have to do. And so part of it goes back to, again, the posture of, and I've had smaller organizations say, we're in a state where we may have privacy laws. It's like, it's kind of onerous that you're expecting us to have the encryption of this data. It's really expensive. So can you change that rule? And it's like, no, I can't change the law. Actually, that's the law. And so it's really helping people understand that not only are these requirements, but they're laws. And if you haven't encrypted the PII data, as an example, not only do we have notification costs and everything are really expensive, but we also have, like in California, mandatory damages, like for everybody, no matter how big or small you are. And so it becomes just this thing that continues to spread. And so as we talk about, it's segmentation and zero trust, it's identity and access management. It's some really kind of simple things that we can do that really reduces exposure, recognizing that while we have been talking about ransomware for several years now, one day we're going to wake up and we're not going to be talking about ransomware, just like we don't talk about credential theft and Zeus anymore back in the keystroke logger days, right? So it's going to become something else. And so what it comes back to is, are we protecting data and our clients' data, recognizing now that IP addresses and MAC addresses are considered personally identifiable information in many states now as of 2023, if you use cookies for marketing. So how many people even know that? And these are the things that are much bigger, to Matt's point, than just a ransom event and what those costs might be, and whether insurance companies are going to be willing to continue to shoulder the burden of regulatory fines and other elements of coverages beyond just paying ransoms or forensic analysis to handle those kinds of losses.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with both of you. And I think the evidence of that is, or the proof in the pudding rather, is the fact that there were fewer ransomware payments last year than there ever has been since it became a trend. And so already we're starting to see that shift in the market and shift in threat actor activity, because there's going to be a new, breach of the day, threat of the day. And whether that's folks maliciously weaponizing ChatGPT for extremely accurate and very convincing business email compromise campaigns that are ultimately targeting, financial fraud or other types of losses, or whatever, the next kind of major threat ends up being. I think it really further highlights the need to have a strategy that addresses everything and not just one particular risk. And Ryan, I'm curious about your thoughts on that point in particular, given your background and kind of how close you've been to the delivery of a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo everything everyone said, and I think people just don't really think through the true cost when something goes wrong. I mean, we specialize in recovery, so we're the ones rebuilding workstations and servers, and I know the carrier rates and the hours we would get, right? So we'd get 2 hours per endpoint compromised, anywhere from $185 to $250 an hour. We'd get 4 to 8 hours per server at $375 to $450 an hour. So do the math in your own environment. I'm not talking about ransom payment or forensics or the disclosures or counsel or the breach coasters. I've just lived in the recovery world. So I think to everyone's point, to think that your carrier is going to step in and pay for all of these things just because you have a simple policy is non-realistic, which is what's ultimately leading to stricter underwriting requirements and essentially carriers becoming regulators in a way, which I think is fantastic. Because at the end of the day, the reason they're doing it is to prevent massive disruption in your organization, right? So the nice thing about cyber insurance shifting to I just say follow the money. The people who are at risk of losing the most money are telling you to do something differently because they do not want to lose money. Therefore, you don't want to lose money. So make the changes, right? So I think this is, I'm hoping at some point this just becomes, foundational to operating the business like anything else. I always go to simple analogies. We experienced a house fire over the last year. I learned a lot about fire insurance, and I learned a lot about things that you need and you don't have. And ultimately, there are requirements and building codes from your city that say, here's how you have to put a house together, but you can still have a fire, right? I think to Matt's point on the reputational stuff, I do think there's more tolerance right now in our society for people who experience a cyber attack probably than there's ever been, because it's just so public and often. However, I do not think there's any tolerance for people who have not taken strategic steps to try to prevent that in the first place. And that, to me, is where companies really get caught right now. Like, oh, we experienced a cyber breach. My first question is, what were you proactively trying to do to prevent it? If the answer is nothing, I am very upset as a customer of yours, right? If it is, we were adhering to these control frameworks, we put these things in place, and you know what, they still got us. Okay, we can work with that, right? So I think we're kind of in this interesting time where it's somewhat expected and accepted. However, I do think there's a very high expectation that you, as someone who holds sensitive data, provides a very valuable service, is doing whatever you can to protect me as your customer. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that really that's a part of incident response planning that a lot of organizations, even that have mature security programs, often neglect, because they're not thinking about that, like, communication and the outside response piece. If you're in the manufacturing world, depending on what part of it you're in, there a lot of suppliers in that world will rate you, and you have kind of an ongoing history of any activity like this and any kind of disruptions that stopped production. If you have line outages that go, for certain lengths of time, they start having to pay by the minute or the hour in some cases, according to those contracts. And that's just one industry. Every industry has its own kind of ways of holding partners and third parties that they work with accountable. And I think a lot of people don't think about those considerations, both from an incident response planning perspective, but also just in terms of how they manage their cyber risk in general. Great responses. I completely agree with all of that. Thank you, guys. So let's turn it back over to Ryan to talk a bit about cybersecurity regulations and compliance. So with the rise of breach notification requirements, as we talked about, in many industries and government institutions or regulators, how do you think this is going to affect directly the requirements that carriers are imposing on cyber insurance policies, and has that already happened?
Yeah, I think it's simple. If you're gonna be forced to pay damages, then the carriers are gonna force you to put controls in place to prevent them from having to pay those damages, right? So I think it's funny. I think this could be perceived as, wow, everyone's getting so strict. Like, there's a reason. It's ultimately there to protect you. So I think we're seeing this across the board. I really like seeing carriers starting to trend toward the direction of just forcing people's hand on framework that's already proven. I think that's the best and most safe approach that does not add more complexity in terms of product selection and what do I need. So I really like the shift we're seeing with folks on saying, hey, like Steven, to your earlier point, like CIS is a great established framework. They don't have a lot of self-interest in terms of getting rich off of what they're offering people. They're authentically coming up with controls to protect you, and seeing carriers start to incorporate those into underwriting, so that when you do go to get cyber, you feel like you've already put a lot of plans in the motion for what they're asking you to do, right? So I think that's a really good trend in our industry right now, is that it's I'm not seeing a lot of carriers come up with like one-off requirements that are unique to them. It seems to be relatively like generalized, and people are trying to move in the same direction.
Yeah, I agree, and I've seen some similar things. But I'm curious, Matt, in terms of what you see, especially since you guys are so close to that kind of application and the process of getting folks coverage through many different carriers. What are your thoughts on this question?
I think it's definitely, as you look at it, especially in the insurance world, you see, all of these requirements and compliance issues, and they typically come out kind of on a state by state basis. It might start in California and New York, and then slowly but surely it kind of proliferates across the entire country. And we've seen that, I think, with just about anything in the cyber world, that identity theft world. I mean, there are standards and protocols that are absolutely required after a breach or an incident. And I think it's pretty simple to kind of look at the front side of that and say, not only what's the likelihood of one of these things happening, or us needing to go through this process or follow these protocols. But I think it also goes down to just the, particularly almost at the state level as well. They want to be good advocates, right? They want to put the persona out that they're doing the right things, and they're asking their carriers to put the right, controls and ask the right questions and have the right requirements. So I think that's one of the big things that we see is just kind of that, that trickle down. If a state comes up with a great idea, well, the neighboring state's going to take a look at it, and it might eventually get adopted by all of the states. But I think there's kind of that continual, unfortunately, kind of reactionary, right? It's not necessarily always proactive. A lot of this is looking at, what happened, and what did we have to do because of that, and then trying to put something in place. And I think that's what's exciting about what we have here is really a group of kind of like-minded individuals that are saying, well, let's do something proactive, and let's try to prevent or eliminate as much as we can, to make these things a little bit easier, and perhaps make these requirements less of a requirement and more of just an industry standard, right? It's not necessarily it's more strict. It's just, again, to some of the earlier analogies, it's you're not going to get that homeowner's insurance if you don't have smoke detectors in your house, right? I mean, it's really as simple as that. And I think you're just going to probably see more of that, where this is less of a response or reaction, short of obviously the newfangled breach that we don't even know about yet, right? That'll still be reactionary, but I think everything else will become more of just a norm or a standard. And I think the landscape of the state regulators and the way policy tends to go from state to state to state is just going to be natural as we go forward.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Well, and Kirsten, kind of dovetailing off of that, I know you and I have talked a lot, and you've done a lot of personal research on this topic in particular, especially as it relates to other forms of insurance. And we've talked in other content about like auto insurance and how that industry changed over time. And given that, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and input on this question.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting, the requirements that I'm seeing from certain carriers, such as patch cycles and a degradation of coverage. So if you haven't patched within 45 days, you lose 25% of your coverage, so on and so on and so on, until it flips over and you have significant co-insurance where you're paying in long before you get any coverage, and then you basically have no coverage. And I think those are really good things, because we know that those things matter. They have high impact on the vulnerabilities that can make a difference in a cyber incident. And so I think things like that are broad, as we've been discussing in this portion of the conversation, I think are helpful, because we know generally that they work, kind of like we know generally that exercising works. And so we want to make that part of our diet and exercise plan for cyber readiness. And the other thing is just really trying to understand it. And I think we suffer from this particularly in our cyber land, which is it doesn't always have to be zero. And I feel like we're judged a lot on zero. And like Ryan, right? No zero house fires, no zero car crashes. But what we haven't been able to prove is, how do we reduce the severity and impact and frequency of these events? And so one of the things that I think is a challenge that we suffer from, and I hear this conversation a lot, is, well, we have all the claims data, so we know what we need to be doing. And it's like, but do we? Because what we know was what we've seen. And this is our challenge that's unique to our space in comparison to all these other insurance risks that exist, because what we don't know, like if there's a particular malware strain that someone used as an injection to have a ransom attack, were there 20 million organizations that had that injection, but only 10% of them had losses? And maybe they were full aggregate losses to the policy, and so they were very high severity. But was it really high severity? And I think that these are the things in having these combined programs that can really help these discussions, because the in relationship to what question is what we don't have. And to your point of our prior conversations, what we've been able to have is a body of data. We know how many car accidents happened. We know how many people had seatbelts on, and we know the results of those who didn't, right? These are the things that we really need to get to in cyber that I think will have a significant impact in being able to boundary what the requirements are and how we help people make better risk decisions, better purchasing decisions, and also the need for services. And I think as we continue on, the need for outsourced SOC services or monitoring, monitoring for configuration changes. These are the things I think are like the last mile components that will help us get much more efficient at combating these things that are the unknowns, because we know they're coming, but it's being able to rapidly identify and remediate those incidents such that they are really indicators of compromise and incidents, not full-blown breaches.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And Ryan, you and I have talked about this recently. I think the interesting trend here that we've seen in response to a lot of that is it's forcing service providers to take a more holistic, all-inclusive approach to providing those types of services, because frankly, anything short of that is just not adequate anymore. It's not enough to be a point solution manager. You've got to manage an entire security program, and it has to be end to end. Otherwise, it's not going to actually address the risk, Kirsten, to multiple points that you made and what you shared. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Stephen, and I think if we're being honest and we have the data, you may find that working with the service provider poses more risk than not working with the service provider. Like, these are things we don't know, right? So I think the service provider world has been turned upside down. I think it's been very good for many who are starting to take this very seriously and understand the risk they pose to their customers and the risk their customers pose back to them. So I think it starts at the service provider level, like making sure I may be an MSP that services 100 small organizations. I may only have 25 employees, but I should not look at myself as a 25 employee SMB from a cybersecurity strategy, because the collective of what I serve is that of a mid-enterprise. Therefore, I should take steps to put in a mid-enterprise stack, right? And I think that's where, Kirsten, to your point, as we get more data, we will know based on industry, based on size of organization, okay, because of these components, here's a subset of things that you need to do based on that data. But I think, the service provider world's super interesting. And I come from that area, but, you kind of grow up in the industry telling companies, yeah, we're everything you need. We're your help desk, we're your cybersecurity. And now you're like, whoa. I'm not everything you need. There's much more you need to do. And then they're getting a lot of resistance from companies that are a little smaller with less money going, I can't afford to put these things in place. And therein lies a lot of tension that exists right now.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think, that kind of brings me to the next topic of discussion, specifically talking about service providers and really that kind of like human element in cybersecurity, right? Because a service provider is playing a very unique role. And Ryan, to your point, the totality of their risk isn't one dimensional. It's bidirectional, and it's in direct relation to the risks that they're managing on behalf of the customers. And so that really raises a great question, which is, what whether it's insurance or other mitigation strategies, what can organizations like IT managed service providers do to address that and address that human error piece as well? Kirsten, I'm curious as to your thoughts on this.
Well, we all talk about security awareness training and internal policy. I think one of the things organizationally, aside even from the service providers at the start, is that organizations need to have a real top-down security posture or position. Security matters to us. It's our bread and butter. This is our life and our livelihood. I think there's this odd, I think of this a lot when I watch these commercials come up, like from Discover, and it shows people like, oh, I'm so great because I don't have to worry about anything bad happening to me. Anything that happens with my credit card is going to get paid back, no matter if someone steals it and buys a bunch of junk on Amazon or not. And I think there's this weird dissonance between these 2 points, because how is it that as consumers we're told you can be as negligent or as sloppy as you want to be out in the digital world, but when you go to work, you have to be really vigilant? And how do you manage those 2 points? And so I feel like that's sort of a broader conversation that we need to have around the human element, because I feel like we're talking out of both sides of our mouths when we have that conversation. So how do we have security awareness training that really emphasizes the importance of the business mission and how we use technology as organizations to keep you in your job? I think it has to be much more, not that we have to be draconian, but that it helps people realize your actions directly impact what happens in this organization and our success as an organization, so that there's unified ownership. And I think from the MSP perspective, that's the same thing. And I think for like to Ryan's point, for a long time, a lot of people thought that their MSPs were helping to manage that, but they weren't. And so now there are these new components going in that I think are requirements. And part of that is requiring that we have these strategies that really it's the old adage, it's as old and tired as anything, but people, process, and technology. It works. It actually works. So I think that those are the components that have to be very standardized and streamlined across both the providers and the companies that they're serving, and with the mutual objective that it needs to be top down.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think you raise a number of points, Matt, that I'm curious about your input on, especially since you work in the privacy and identity world as well, within the RetireCo family. What I guess what are people missing here?
Well, I think probably the biggest point, I mean, is definitely just that, to all of this, I mean, it's people being more proactive in their approach. I mean, even the entire marketplace of, identity theft protection and, credit reporting and everything else. It's really all designed just to tell you after something's happened. It's, oh, look what bad just happened. And I mean, I do find that, our organization is one of the few that takes proactive approaches where we're educating the consumer and educating organizations and businesses. And we do what we call like an ID checkup on an annual basis. And it's basically just the opportunity to look at all of that public record and all of that public data that's out there. And, I ask people every day, like, when's the last time you looked at your background report? When's the last time you looked at your check writing history, rental records, pulled your medical records, and actually reviewed them for fraud or errors? And most people have either never done it, or they certainly aren't doing it on an annual basis. So we're really encouraging people to be diligent and do that annually, because that's a really great indicator. If you have fraud or errors that appear there, that you may be compromised. From an organizational standpoint, we're starting to see more and more of the, financial advisory firms, the broker dealers, the banks, the credit unions. They're employing this now, not only for their employees, but also for their customers. It's when they bring on a new hire or they bring in a new customer to that organization or institution. It's, well, before we even set them up in our system, let's see if maybe they've already been compromised. And they take that time and, put a little bit of effort and energy in there. But I think it's just largely education, and kind of to Kirsten's point, like, everything being so reactionary and, promoting this, oh, you can do anything you want and you can post your social security number on TV and it's fine, right? Like, well, again, it's just a really bad way of marketing, I think identity and cyber security protection in general. It's, these things need to be proactive, and you really need to take the time and the energy with especially as an organization, with your employees, and make sure they're kind of in good shape, or do everything you can to find out if they've already been compromised. And I think, as you see more organizations taking that approach, and what we see in the, the financial service industry, it's shocking, because almost a quarter of the people that we take through this process have errors or fraud. So, I mean, if you take an organization that has 1,000 employees, odds are 250 of their employees are compromised in some way, or there's errors. Yet, shockingly, they have a laptop that's hooked up to the corporate server, and they got a cell phone they run around with that they can log into their email. And, we have had financial advisors that lose a cell phone that has, hundreds of millions of dollars of financial data related to their clients on it. And again, it's just a matter of just a little bit of proactive measure, just to ensure, okay, do we have an issue before we have an issue? The alerts aren't good enough, in my opinion. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I to both the point that you and Kirsten made there. I think the whole industry is kind of curved around the after effect and the bad that's already happened, and not enough around, putting in people's headspace, like, hey, being responsible, working securely, which is really, like, if you boil this down to its simplest form, that's what security really is, right? It's transacting business in a responsible and secure manner. And I think what I'd like to see, although I don't know that I am seeing this, what I'd like to see in the industry is for security awareness programs in general to be more geared at educating employees on the business processes they're responsible for and how to actually make sure that those business processes are secure, as opposed to just telling them, don't click on links, because everybody has been parroting that since the beginning of time. And of course it's true, but it's not the only thing that folks need to consider, and the human element of being aware and being secure in how they're transacting business. Ryan, I'm curious, because you come from the IT managed services world and you've solved this both for customers and internal companies. I guess, what are your thoughts on this one?
I think addressing the human element, it really just needs to be embedded in your culture. I know at Illumio, for example, I mean, we go through all of the security awareness training in the world, but we also have, a Slack channel with immediate access to our security team. Any person at any time can ask any question, right? And just creating a culture of people who are like, this feels off, say something is huge. So I think, a lot of it from like a CEO perspective is look your employees in the eye and go, I can spend millions of dollars trying to prevent us from getting breached, and you can do one thing that can circumvent all of that, right? So the reason we're so crazy about this is, I was previously a CEO of a company out of Chicago, and we had a policy that if you ever left your desk and your computer was unlocked, the person would go to your computer, they'd open your email, they'd send an email to all staff, and they'd say, this person owes everyone donuts, and they'd have to bring donuts in for the entire company the next day. Like, some of this stuff could be gamified. But I do think from a technology perspective, we're getting a lot better at identifying, especially like business email compromise, obviously is the source of the majority of a lot of what goes wrong. But what's shocking to me is, and it'd be interesting if we're all honest about this, the companies you work with put so many protocols in to protect your email inbox, and then you go to your personal Gmail from that same computer, right? There's just like things like that where, what I think we really need to see is clear separation of personal technology versus business technology. I think that could be culturally interruptive, but we really need to trend in that direction, because we can do all these things and they can get something on their personal thing and screw it all up. So the human side will always be a factor that'll keep many of us on this call in business, unfortunately. But I think just doing whatever you can to evangelize the importance of you as an individual contributor in an organization, raising your hand when you think something feels off, Steven, to your point, not just an email and things that are related to the processes of what you do today, and what you manage, just ask. One quick story, Illumio sponsors RSA every year. When we got back from RSA, many people in our organization were getting like text spoofs from our CEO and many other people in our conversation, right? And it was just like blasted. So, I mean, there's just little things that will always be new and weird. And someone said, hey, is this really a real text? And all of a sudden everyone's like, I got it too. And then, just kind of getting the word out quick is really important to help.
Yeah, no, I think to your point, creating a culture of security and making security an open conversation in every aspect of the company are two really important.
And I will say, unfortunately, with like the security awareness training, my opinion of it, it's done in a way where you want to get through it as quickly as you possibly can, right? It is just like, it is in my mind now classified as boring pre-employment screening or things I have to do to start working. So I do think someone needs to come up with a more creative way to do this, where it's, I don't know. So I'm just being honest. I want to get through that as quickly as I possibly can in my mind. I'm like, I get it. Don't click the link is basically the everything it's telling you. So it'll be interesting to see if we can get a little more creative there too.
Yes, interesting for sure, as we see and kind of monitor trends in that space. So finally, I wanted to kind of end our conversation on this last topic and really just kind of give everybody a little bit more time to expound here. So talking about the future of cybersecurity and cyber liability insurance, what do you guys see? And let's start with Matt here again. What are the emerging trends in cybersecurity and cyber liability insurance? How can organizations prepare for the future, and what should they be thinking about as they kind of ingest and actualize all of this intelligence?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, answer it, I mean, in real general, I mean, we've definitely summarized a lot of that, here on the call today, obviously. I mean, it's more of a proactive approach. It's more of a, an environment where the security and technology pieces that are being put in place are designed to address, what those real cyber liability risks are. And I think, like every industry, as it evolves and embraces technology, I think we're just going to continue to see more and more of this. And, to your point, Stephen, I don't think cyber liability will be sold the way it was 5 years ago ever again at some point. I think every carrier, everyone's going to recognize you do have to be proactive. You need the controls, you need these measures in place. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. And I also think the introduction of these non-insurance products through trusted, be it insurance agents, financial advisors, attorneys, accountants. A lot of people still turn to those kind of trusted professional sources, and I think they need to start recognizing and implementing some of these components. If you're going to provide somebody financial advising or financial risk management or estate management or whatever you might call that service, if you're not recognizing this real risk that exists out there, particularly in a corporate or commercial landscape, it's you're really doing a disservice to your customers. So whether you're finding a trusted individual within your network that you can refer these businesses to, whether you're working directly with a group like ours or going straight to Antigen for the security solution on that side, I think that's just going to be a big part of it. It's no longer going to be really a business where the insurance is completely separated and insulated and isolated from the technology piece. And I also don't think it's going to be limited to professionals in the insurance world. I think there's going to be outside, firms and brokerage groups and organizations that recognize, just like the groups that are out there doing installing the fire suppression systems and everything else, right? They're getting referred somehow, and it's usually through some sort of insurance relationship, but the building inspector's aware of it, the contractor's aware of it. It just becomes kind of part of that culture. And I think it'll continue for a long time to be delivered through kind of a professional resource. But I think that's something that industries are going to have to embrace. And it's definitely something, I'm excited about in general. There's always been a need for more proactive non-insurance measures to be available and offered as a risk management solution through like those trusted resources. So that's my thought on it. I definitely see the trend moving that way.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Matt. And I completely agree. Ryan, what are your thoughts here? I know we talk a lot about kind of next generation cyber insurance and just what this industry is doing in general, both from kind of the recovery and IR side as well as the carrier side. What are your thoughts here?
I think the first thing to understand is you're never going to arrive, right? You're never going to meet the day where you've done everything you need to in cyber because it changes too fast. So I think as a smaller organization, if you're working with a service provider, the questions you need to start asking them in those quarterly business reviews is, what are you doing to stay current? What controls have you put in place, right? Being really forthcoming and forcing them to be forthcoming with their strategy. And then for the folks who are large enough to have those internal teams, what am I doing to keep my staff current? The nice thing that's happening to cyber is your renewals become an event to say, hey, how are we doing? What are the new things that they introduced? Yeah, I think there's a lot changing. I think maybe I'm wrong on this. You two on the phone call know way more than I would. I do think the underwriting component over the next year or two is going to get simpler because there's going to be a lot more education and data, and it's just going to become like more expected. Where right now it's foreseen as this very like big event that what am I going to have to do or change? So I think that's a good thing, and I just like people to think like I think these changes are being put on us pretty authentically. Right. It's not a trick, right, to get you to spend more money, to get you, we're really, really trying to limit risk that you are encountering on every day and you don't even know it. So I think, there's opportunity to trust, whoever you're working with on the insurance side, that if they're telling you to do it, there's reason for it. And on the service provider side, same thing. They're close with a lot of the carriers. They know what's coming. So when they're asking to put these controls in place, there's reason for that. So I'm bullish on where we're heading in a good way. I obviously don't think ransomware is going away. I think there's going to be something new, but I think if we can start to really understand how to limit the blast radius and take something that could be catastrophic and turn it into a 2 or 3 day event versus 90 days, that's where everyone starts to do a lot better. In this, we know how to react to this more comfortably. So I think all good things coming.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Kirsten, last but not least.
Yes, well, I concur with everything, and the thing I would add is, and we've kind of started with this too, is the financial component is what's driving these changes, and I've long felt from the very beginning that as long as we couldn't really draw a straight line between those 2 points, we were going to struggle with convincing people that these are good things. So now we have the attention of everyone. I think one of the key things that we have to do is build the trust bridge a bit to the carrier side, because I hear it all the time. No, they don't actually pay claims. No, they're going to like cut everything out. It's just watered down. There's no point. I'll self-insure. You can fill in all those things. And I think that to both Matt and Ryan's point, that that's not really what's happening. There's actually a desire to make sure that there are the proper ways for us to help compensate people for these financial losses. But that means you have responsibilities too. And the new one is around systemic losses. This is an example. And I do believe that probably our next frontier are some weird, systemic cloud losses. And so how do we deal with that? And I think there's good and just reason for having those as exclusions. But what happens if that happens? But we would literally bankrupt the entire system if we were to just give everyone the normal limits. And so I think proactively carriers need to stop saying, hey, we're just not going to cover it, and start thinking, how do we help start to really figure out what these next things are going to be, and how do we work together, and like how do we proactively, because we've been talking a lot about proactively start measuring those things, because we know that's what's coming. And I think that those are the things that, as we start to look at those trends, and the other is get ready to give up data, because this whole thing, like, I'm not giving you any data, so you just got to figure it out. Those days, I don't understand why people put these things in their cars, but they refuse to let people have any visibility into their corporate networks. We don't want to read your email, right? And so I think that helping be transparent about those things too, because that helps us all get really a lot better. And so,
well, and Kirsten, if I could add on to this, you will see the data eventually.
You will.
And it's when they're breached.
That's right.
Right. And I think that's what a lot of people lose sight of. And what's funny is I have a completely different perspective. I can't believe some of the things the carriers pay out on.
Yeah,
like multinational manufacturers that are running like Server 2003 infrastructure, right? I mean, I've seen carriers pay things like, holy smokes, y'all paid for that, right? So I think there's like a balance going on.
But the carriers don't say that they're doing it. And so you see all this nasty press about all the things they aren't doing when you're not hearing about all the things they are doing. And I think that that's the transparency thing that we have to fix. I completely agree with you. I'm like, are you kidding me? You paid that?
Yeah, I think you just hit the nail on the head with the biggest change, and it's data, right? Because one, the underwriting applications require you to share much more data. It will be validated if there's a breach. So don't lie, because you're going to find out. But two, we'll go back to life insurance. They take my blood, they pull my hair, like they get that information. And I think that data is going to be tremendously valuable, like to our future. Now, tons of questions of what y'all are going to do with the data and where it's going to sit and what your protocols and protections are to keep it safe. Those are the questions I would be asking, right? But I think to your point, no one's trying to see your email. I think from an actuary perspective, you're trying to say, okay, when we have EDR in place, when we have MFA in place, when we have segmentation in place, and there's a breach, what was the scope of that versus the 3 people who didn't, right? And that allows us to get more efficient in pricing and packaging and in policy. So
because I think when we get there, what we're able to do is to get to the point where we can simplify, because we can say, we know these 4 things really work.
Yep.
And what's challenging in relationship to what question is we're not really sure. All we know is what doesn't work. But that doesn't give us the vantage point of all the things that are working. And I think that that's really and I think that's the exciting piece is I think we are going to get there, but we all have to decide that we have to row that boat together. And so the collaboration piece, I think, is really where we all have a massive opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think Ryan, to your point, well, really to both of your points, insured have to stop looking at their carrier like they're an auditor and look at them more like a risk management partner. And
they're on your team.
Yes, if you're not aligning all of this before the bad thing happens, man, is it going to be way worse for you. And it also to the point both of you, or well, all 3 of you made about the actuarial differences that are coming in the future. Cyber insurance carriers have gotten smarter, are getting smarter, are thinking now about, not just historically what has happened. The best ones are saying, in the last 12 months, how much did these particular patterns or anti-patterns, how did these things affect current modern ransomware? How did these things affect current modern business email compromises? How did this affect data extortion? Did it prevent it, or did these patterns actually prove ineffective? And those are the conclusions, the quantitative conclusions on the actuarial side, that I think a lot of carriers are both interested in and focused on. And I think the continued focus on that data element, to the point that you all raised, is going to put those carriers in a position where everything that they're providing on the requirement side is not only prescriptive but well justified, and the ROI will be an easy conversation to walk down the road.
Yeah, and Steven, I think the ROI, that's a good point. I think the carriers with messaging can help, from my opinion, in terms of like, we're not asking you for perfection. One, we know it's not possible. Two, we know it costs too much.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not like the carrier saying we're asking you to put something in place to ensure you can never get breached. Right. Because what that would cost would likely put many of the SMBs we've spoken of out of business.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think just everyone being forthcoming and transparent with the why, and, based on your size, here's what we think, and here's some potential costs to you. But the savings in the event of something happening is significant for both of us, is going to be very helpful.
It's two things. It's mean time to know, mean time to remediation. And
Yep.
the quicker we can shorten the distance between those points, the
Mm-hmm.
better off we all are. And that's what we need to understand.
Yeah.
I completely agree. Well, once again, thank you everybody for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists for all your contributions in the conversation. Really, really enjoyed today's segment. Hope everybody comes back around to our future segments, and we will talk to you all again very soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Steven.
Thanks.